The courtroom doors swing open with a confidence that immediately draws every eye in Providence Municipal Court. She walks in like she owns the building, designer sunglasses perched on her head, a pristine cream blazer that probably costs more than most people's monthly rent, and heels that click against the old wooden floors with deliberate, measured arrogance. Behind her, trailing like anxious shadows, are two impeccably dressed individuals, a lawyer in a sharp navy suit clutching a leather briefcase, and what appears to be a communications advisor whispering urgently into her ear. The young woman waves them off dismissively, her expression a mixture of boredom and barely concealed contempt. Judge Frank Caprio sits at the bench, reading glasses perched on his nose, reviewing the case file before him. He doesn't look up immediately. He's seen thousands of people walk through these doors, nervous teenagers, exhausted parents, elderly folks confused by parking tickets they don't remember getting. But there's something different about the energy in the room right now. The bailiff clears his throat, and even Inspector Quinn, standing near the evidence table with his usual bemused expression, raises an eyebrow. Case number 7492, the clerk announces, her voice steady but her eyes darting between the defendant and the judge. The City of Providence versus Madison Elizabeth Hartwell. Failure to appear, contempt of court, and willful violation of multiple parking violations. Judge Caprio finally looks up, and his face registers something that those who know him well would recognize: not anger, but a kind of quiet curiosity mixed with concern. He removes his glasses slowly, folds them with care, and sets them down on the bench. His eyes, warm and brown and impossibly kind even after decades on the bench, study the young woman standing before him. "Miss Hartwell," he says, his voice carrying that distinctive Rhode Island accent that somehow makes even serious matters feel a little more human, a little more approachable. "Welcome to Providence Municipal Court. Do you know why you're here today?" Madison shifts her weight, one hand on her hip, and lets out an audible sigh that echoes in the suddenly silent courtroom. "I have a general idea," she says, her voice dripping with the kind of casual dismissiveness that makes Inspector Quinn actually wince. "Look, Your Honor, is that what I'm supposed to call you? I'm sure we can handle this quickly. I have a lunch appointment at 1:30, and traffic on the east side is terrible this time of day." The courtroom collectively holds its breath. Even the stenographer's fingers pause over the keys. Judge Caprio doesn't react immediately. He simply looks at her, really looks at her, the way a grandfather might study a grandchild who's just said something shocking at the dinner table. Not with anger, but with something that feels almost like sadness. "You have a lunch appointment," he repeats slowly, letting the words settle into the air between them. He glances down at the file again, then back up at her. "Miss Hartwell, according to this file, you received 17 parking tickets over the past 14 months. 17. You ignored every single notice we sent to your address. You failed to appear for your scheduled court date 3 months ago. Do you understand that's why you're here, not just for the parking violations, but because you chose not to show up when the court asked you to?" Madison rolls her eyes in front of Judge Frank Caprio, and her attorney takes a half step forward, his face pale, his mouth opening as if to intervene. But she speaks first, cutting him off with the casual cruelty of someone who's never faced real consequences. "I forgot," she says with a shrug. "I have a very busy schedule. I'm involved in multiple charitable organizations, I'm on the board of 3 nonprofits, and my father's administration keeps me traveling constantly. I can't be expected to remember every little parking ticket in every little city I drive through." Every little city. The words hang in the air like a slap. Providence isn't just any city to the people in this courtroom, it's home. It's where Judge Caprio has served for over 3 decades, where he's fought to give people second chances, where he's cried with defendants and celebrated their victories and helped them find their way through impossible situations. And this young woman just called it a little city with the kind of dismissive contempt that cuts deeper than she probably realizes. Inspector Quinn, standing near the back, crosses his arms and shakes his head slowly. The clerk's expression has gone from professional neutrality to something approaching disbelief. Even the defense attorney looks mortified, his hand moving to his temple as if fighting off a migraine. But Judge Caprio doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't bang his gavel or launch into a lecture. Instead, he leans forward slightly, his elbows resting on the bench, his hands folded together in that characteristic pose that anyone who's watched his viral videos knows well. When he speaks, his voice is quiet, almost gentle, but there's something underneath it, a kind of steel wrapped in velvet. Every little city, he repeats, and now there's the faintest hint of something in his voice. Not anger exactly, but disappointment. Miss Hartwell, do you know how long I've been a judge in this courtroom? Do you know how many people I've seen stand where you're standing right now? Madison opens her mouth to respond, probably with another dismissive comment, but something in Judge Caprio's eyes stops her. For the first time since she walked in, she hesitates. 38 years, the judge continues, his voice soft but carrying to every corner of the courtroom. 38 years I've sat on this bench. I've seen single mothers who drove on an expired registration because they had to choose between paying for that and buying groceries for their kids. I've seen elderly people on fixed incomes who got parking tickets because they couldn't read the signs clearly anymore. I've seen veterans, struggling with PTSD, who made mistakes because they were fighting battles inside their heads that the rest of us can't imagine. And do you know what every single one of those people had in common? He pauses, letting the question settle. Madison says nothing, her expression wavering somewhere between defiance and uncertainty. They showed up, Judge Caprio says quietly. They showed up when the court asked them to. They showed up even though they were scared, even though they were ashamed, even though they didn't know how they were going to pay their fines. They showed up because they respected this court, they respected this city, and they understood that nobody is above the law. The silence in the courtroom is absolute. Madison's lawyer has closed his briefcase and is staring at the floor. The communications advisor has stopped whispering and is watching Judge Caprio with something approaching awe. And Madison herself, for perhaps the first time in her privileged life, looks genuinely uncertain. Judge Caprio picks up his glasses again, puts them back on, and looks down at the file. It says here your father is Governor James Hartwell. Is that correct? Yes, Madison says, and her voice is smaller now, less certain. He is. And you mentioned charitable work and non-profit boards, the judge continues, still reading. That's admirable. I'm sure you're very busy. But let me ask you something, Miss Hartwell. He looks up again, and his eyes are kind but searching, the way they always are when he's trying to understand the person standing before him, not just the case. Why didn't you just pay the tickets? 17 parking violations according to this file, the total comes to $840. I'm going to assume that's not an insurmountable sum for someone in your position. So why ignore them? Why not show up when the court asked? Help me understand. And there it is, the signature Judge Caprio question, delivered with such genuine curiosity and compassion that even the most hardened defendants usually crack. Help me understand. Not defend yourself or explain your actions, but help me understand, as if he genuinely wants to see the world through her eyes, to find the humanity in what seems like inexplicable behavior. Madison opens her mouth, then closes it. She glances back at her lawyer, who gives her a barely perceptible nod, as if encouraging her to answer honestly. She looks back at Judge Caprio, and for just a moment, something flickers across her face, something that might be shame or confusion or the first dawning realization that she's in a situation she can't charm or buy or dismiss her way out of. I don't know, she finally says, and for the first time, her voice lacks that edge of arrogance. I honestly don't know. Judge Caprio nods slowly, as if this answer, this admission of not knowing, is somehow more honest than anything else she's said since walking through those doors. He leans back in his chair, studying her with those impossibly kind eyes, and everyone in the courtroom can sense that something important is about to happen, though none of them can quite predict what it will be. Judge Caprio removes his glasses again and sets them aside, a gesture that those familiar with his courtroom know signals a shift from the formality of legal proceedings to something more personal, more human. He looks at Madison with that expression he's famous for, the one that's helped countless people open up about their struggles, their fears, their hidden pain. "Miss Hartwell," he says gently, "I'm going to ask you to do something that might feel uncomfortable. I want you to talk to me. Not as a judge, not as someone who's here to punish you, but as someone who genuinely wants to understand what's happening in your life. Can you do that?" Madison shifts uncomfortably, her arms crossing defensively across her chest. The sunglasses on her head slip slightly, and she reaches up to adjust them with trembling fingers. It's the first sign of genuine vulnerability anyone in the courtroom has seen from her. "I don't see what my personal life has to do with parking tickets," she says, but the defiance in her voice is weaker now, almost brittle. "Maybe nothing," Judge Caprio acknowledges with a small nod. "Or maybe everything. You'd be surprised how often the things we think are separate, our actions and our circumstances, turn out to be connected in ways we don't even realize ourselves." He pauses, letting that sink in. "Let me start with something simple. You said you forgot about the tickets and the court date. In my experience, people don't usually forget things unless they're overwhelmed by something else. So I'm wondering what's overwhelming you." The question lands like a gentle hand on a bruised shoulder. Madison's lawyer looks up sharply, as if about to object, but the communications advisor puts a hand on his arm, stopping him. Something in her expression suggests she understands what Judge Caprio is doing, and maybe, just maybe, she thinks Madison needs this. "Nothing is overwhelming me," Madison says, but her voice cracks slightly on the word nothing. "I have a perfectly manageable life. I attend events, I fulfill my obligations to my father's office, I represent the family at various functions." "That sounds exhausting," Judge Caprio interrupts gently, and the simple acknowledgement seems to catch Madison completely off guard. She stares at him as if he's just spoken a foreign language. "Excuse me?" "It sounds exhausting," the judge repeats, leaning forward slightly. "All those events, all those obligations, representing your family constantly. When do you get to just be Madison? When do you get to do things for yourself, not because they look good or because they're expected, but because they matter to you?" Madison's mouth opens, then closes. Her eyes, which have been hard and defiant since she walked in, suddenly look suspiciously bright. She blinks rapidly, and when she speaks, her voice is barely above a whisper. "I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before." Inspector Quinn, watching from his position near the evidence table, feels something shift in his chest. He's been in this courtroom for 15 years, and he's seen Judge Caprio work this particular kind of magic hundreds of times, the way he finds the crack in someone's armor not to hurt them, but to help them, to let the light in so healing can begin. Judge Caprio nods slowly, as if Madison's answer confirms something he suspected. "Tell me about your father. Governor Hartwell. What's your relationship with him like?" "That's definitely not relevant to parking tickets," Madison says, but there's no heat in it anymore. She sounds tired suddenly, as if maintaining the facade of indifference has been draining her more than she realized. "Humor me," Judge Caprio says with a small smile. "I'm an old man, and I'm curious about people. It's why I've stayed in this job so long. So tell me, your father, the governor. You too close?" Madison is silent for a long moment. The courtroom waits, collectively holding its breath. Even the court stenographer has slowed her typing, not wanting to miss a word. "We used to be," Madison finally says, and her voice is so different from when she first walked in that it's almost jarring. "When I was little, before he got into politics, we were really close. He used to take me to the park every Sunday, just the two of us. We'd get ice cream from this little shop near our house and talk about everything: school, friends, my dreams, his dreams. He wanted to be a teacher originally, did you know that? He always said the most important thing in the world was helping young people find their potential." Past tense, Judge Caprio observes gently. "You said used to be and wanted to be. What changed?" Madison's hands, which have been gripping her arms defensively, slowly dropped to her sides. Everything changed when he decided to run for governor. Suddenly our whole lives became about the campaign, then the administration, then re-election. Every moment, every interaction, every appearance had to be calculated. We couldn't just be a family anymore, we had to be the first family of Rhode Island. Do you know what that's like? Having every conversation analyzed, every photo scrutinized, every mistake amplified? Judge Caprio nods thoughtfully. I can imagine it's difficult. But let me ask you something else. These parking tickets, most of them are from the East Side, near Brown University, and from Federal Hill. What were you doing in those areas? Madison hesitates, and for the first time, something that looks like genuine emotion, not anger or contempt, but something softer and more painful, crosses her face. I was visiting someone, she says quietly. A friend? Judge Caprio prompts gently. My brother, Madison says, and suddenly the tears she's been holding back start to fall. I was visiting my brother. Well, his apartment. He's not there anymore, but I kept going anyway because it was the only place that still felt like him, the only place where I could remember what our family used to be like before everything became about politics and image and managing crises. The revelation shifts the entire energy of the courtroom. Even the clerk, who's maintained professional composure through thousands of hearings, looks moved. Judge Caprio's expression softens even further, and he reaches for a box of tissues that he keeps on the bench, a box that's been used by countless defendants who've broken down in this very courtroom. Tell me about your brother, he says softly. What's his name? Michael, Madison says, accepting a tissue from the bailiff who's quietly approached. His name is Michael, and he was 3 years older than me. He's the one who should have been the perfect political son. He was brilliant, compassionate, genuinely interested in public service. My father adored him. We all did. Where is Michael now? Judge Caprio asks, though from the way he asks the question gently, carefully, as if handling something precious and fragile, it's clear he already suspects the answer won't be simple. Madison wipes her eyes, smearing her carefully applied makeup, and when she looks up at Judge Caprio, she looks younger somehow, more vulnerable, more real than she has since walking through the courthouse doors. He left, she says simply. 2 years ago, right after my father won re-election, Michael just left. He couldn't handle it anymore, the pressure, the expectations, the constant surveillance of our lives. He told me he felt like he was suffocating, like he was being crushed under the weight of being the governor's son. He said he needed to figure out who he was without all of that. So he left his apartment, left Providence, and none of us have heard from him since. The courtroom is so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Inspector Quinn has removed his cap and is holding it against his chest, the way people do at funerals. Judge Caprio's eyes, always kind but now brimming with understanding and compassion, never leave Madison's face. And your father? The judge asks quietly. How did he handle Michael leaving? Madison lets out a bitter laugh that's half sob. He erased him. Not literally, but effectively. We don't talk about Michael in public. My father's press team crafted a story about him pursuing private opportunities abroad that we're supposed to stick to if anyone asks. At home, it's like Michael never existed. My father threw himself even deeper into work, and my mother started taking more anxiety medication, and I. She trails off, looking down at her hands. And you started collecting parking tickets, Judge Caprio finishes gently, in neighborhoods where your brother used to live, maybe hoping that by going to those places, you could feel close to him again. Maybe hoping that one day you'd turn a corner and he'd be there, and everything could go back to the way it was. Madison looks up sharply, and fresh tears stream down her face. How did you know that? Judge Caprio offers a sad smile. Because I've been doing this for a very long time, and I've learned that people don't just break rules for no reason. They break rules because they're hurting, or scared, or lost, or trying desperately to hold on to something they're afraid of losing. You weren't being careless with those parking tickets, Miss Hartwell. You were being in pain. Judge Caprio leans back in his chair, his expression thoughtful, and the courtroom remains suspended in that profound silence that comes when something deeply human and true has been revealed. He's quiet for a long moment, just looking at Madison, not with judgment, but with the kind of recognition that comes from decades of seeing people at their most vulnerable, their most real. Let me tell you something about grief, he finally says, his voice soft but carrying clearly through the courtroom. It doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes grief isn't crying at a funeral or wearing black. Sometimes grief is driving to your brother's old neighborhood at 2 in the morning because you can't sleep. Sometimes it's ignoring parking tickets because paying attention to them would mean acknowledging that time is moving forward, that life is continuing even though someone you love is gone. Sometimes grief looks like a young woman standing in a courtroom, pretending she doesn't care about anything, because caring hurts too much. Madison is openly crying now, no longer trying to hide it, no longer maintaining the carefully constructed facade of indifference and superiority. Her lawyer has quietly stepped closer, not to whisper legal advice, but simply to offer silent support. Even the communications advisor has tears in her eyes. But here's what concerns me, Miss Hartwell, Judge Caprio continues, and now there's a different quality to his voice, still gentle, but more direct. You're not just hurting yourself with this behavior. You're hurting this city, this community that you dismissed so casually when you walked in here. Do you know what those parking tickets represent? They represent firefighters who couldn't get to a hydrant because someone was parked illegally. They represent elderly residents who couldn't find parking near their homes. They represent a social contract that says we all follow the same rules because we all live in the same community together. He pauses, letting that sink in, then continues. And when you failed to appear for your court date, when you ignored our notices, you weren't just disrespecting me or this courtroom. You were telling everyone who lives in this city, everyone who struggles to pay their tickets, everyone who shows up even when they're scared or ashamed, that the rules don't apply to you because of who your father is. That's not grief, Miss Hartwell. That's privilege, and it's exactly the kind of privilege that's destroying people's faith in our justice system. The words are harsh, but they're delivered with such evident care and concern that they don't feel like an attack. They feel like truth, spoken by someone who genuinely wants Madison to understand, to grow, to become better. Madison nods through her tears. I know, she whispers. I know, and I'm so sorry. I've been so angry and so lost, and I've been taking it out on everyone and everything around me because I don't know how else to deal with it. My father won't talk about Michael, my mother pretends everything is fine, and I feel like I'm the only one who remembers that we used to be a real family. I feel like I'm screaming and no one can hear me. Judge Caprio's expression softens even further, and he nods slowly. I hear you, he says simply. I hear you right now, Madison. And I think there are probably a lot of people who want to hear you, but you have to be willing to let them. You have to be willing to ask for help instead of pushing everyone away with anger and arrogance. Inspector Quinn, watching from his usual spot, is reminded of why he stayed in this job for so many years despite offers to work in bigger, more prestigious courts. This is what justice looks like when it's done right, not just punishment, but understanding. Not just consequences, but compassion. Not just ruling on cases, but recognizing the humans behind them. Judge Caprio glances down at the file again, then back up at Madison. I want to ask you something else, and I want you to be completely honest with me. These charitable organizations you mentioned, these nonprofit boards, are you involved in them because you genuinely care about the work, or because it looks good for your father's political image? The question catches Madison off guard, and she opens her mouth to give what's probably an automatic, diplomatic answer. But then she stops, really thinks about it, and when she speaks, her voice is raw with honesty. Both, she admits. Some of them I do care about. There's a literacy program I work with that genuinely matters to me. But most of them? I'm there because my father's campaign manager thought it would be good optics for the governor to have a daughter involved in community service. I go to the galas, I smile for the photos, I give carefully scripted speeches about the importance of giving back, and then I go home feeling empty because none of it feels real. It's all just performance. Just like your appearance today? Judge Caprio asks, and there's no accusation in his voice, just curiosity. Madison actually laughs through her tears, a real laugh, not the practiced, polished one she probably uses at those galas. Yes, she says. Exactly like my appearance today. I walked in here thinking I could perform my way through this too. Designer clothes, dismissive attitude, name drop my father, get the tickets dismissed, move on. I didn't expect. She trails off, looking at Judge Caprio with something like wonder. I didn't expect someone to actually see me. The words hang in the air, and Judge Caprio's eyes grow bright with emotion. This is the moment he lives for, not the power of the bench, not the authority of his position, but these moments of genuine human connection, when someone who's been lost finds their way back to themselves, even if just for a moment. I do see you, Madison, he says quietly. And I'll tell you what else I see. I see a young woman who's in tremendous pain because she loves her brother and misses him desperately. I see someone who's struggling under the weight of expectations that would crush most people. I see someone who's angry, justifiably angry, at a family system that's prioritized politics over people, image over authenticity. But I also see someone who's forgotten that she has choices. You don't have to perform. You don't have to be the perfect governor's daughter. You can be a real person with real feelings who makes real mistakes and then actually deals with the consequences. He pauses, then asks, have you tried to find Michael? Since he left? Madison shakes her head. My father forbade it. He said it would create a media circus, that it would damage his administration, that we needed to respect Michael's decision to leave. But I think. She hesitates, then continues, her voice barely above a whisper. I think he's just scared. Scared of what Michael might say if we found him, scared of having to confront the fact that his political ambitions cost him his son. What do you think Michael would say? Judge Caprio asks gently. If you could find him, if you could talk to him right now, what do you think he'd tell you? The question clearly catches Madison unprepared. She stands there, tears still streaming down her face, really thinking about it. The courtroom waits, everyone leaning forward slightly, invested now in this story that's unfolding before them, no longer just a case about parking tickets, but a story about family, loss, and the cost of living a life that isn't really yours. I think, Madison finally says, her voice thick with emotion, I think he'd tell me to stop living for Dad's approval. He'd tell me to stop pretending to be someone I'm not. He'd probably be angry that I've spent the last 2 years collecting parking tickets and acting like an entitled brat instead of actually dealing with the fact that he's gone. Michael never had any patience for self-pity. He'd tell me to get my act together, to figure out what I actually care about, and to stop using his absence as an excuse to self-destruct. Judge Caprio nods slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Your brother sounds like a wise person. Maybe you should listen to him, even if he's not physically here. Maybe especially because he's not here, maybe the best way to honor his memory, to hold on to the connection you had, is to become the kind of person he'd be proud of, instead of someone who uses his absence as an excuse to hurt herself and others. Madison is nodding now, wiping her eyes, and something in her posture has changed. She stands straighter, looks more present, more grounded than she has since walking into the courtroom. I want to do that, she says. I want to be better. I want to stop hiding behind my father's name and actually figure out who I am and what I care about. I don't know how to start. Judge Caprio picks up his pen, taps it gently against the desk, a habitual gesture those familiar with his courtroom know well. Well, he says thoughtfully, I think dealing honestly with the consequences of your actions might be a good place to start. Taking responsibility, not because it's politically expedient or because someone's watching, but because it's the right thing to do. What do you think? I think you're right, Madison says, and there's no hesitation in her voice now. I think I need to pay those fines and stop running from the things I've done. I think I need to apologize to you, to this court, to this city that I insulted when I walked in here. She turns slightly, addressing not just Judge Caprio but the entire courtroom. I'm sorry, she says, and her voice is clear and genuine. I'm sorry for my disrespect, for my arrogance, for treating this court and this community like they were beneath me. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. The courtroom is silent for a moment, and then something remarkable happens. Inspector Quinn begins to clap slowly, deliberately, and the sound echoes in the quiet space. The clerk joins him, then the bailiff, and soon the entire courtroom is applauding this young woman who walked in with contempt and is standing there now with tears on her face and truth in her voice. Judge Caprio raises a hand gently, and the applause dies down. There's a warmth in his eyes that everyone in the courtroom can see, but there's also something else, a thoughtfulness, as if he's weighing something carefully in his mind. He looks down at the file one more time, studies it for a long moment, then looks back up at Madison. Miss Hartwell, he says, his voice taking on a more official tone, I appreciate your honesty and your apology. I genuinely do. But I have to tell you something, and I need you to hear me on this. An apology, no matter how sincere, doesn't erase the consequences of our actions. You accumulated 17 parking violations. You ignored every notice. You failed to appear when this court summoned you. That behavior has consequences, and as a judge, I have a responsibility to this community to ensure that everyone, regardless of their last name or their father's position, is held accountable under the law. Madison nods, her face serious. I understand, Your Honor. I'm prepared to pay whatever fines are owed and accept whatever other consequences you think are appropriate. Judge Caprio nods slowly. The total amount, including late fees and the failure to appear charge, comes to $2,340. That's quite a bit more than the original $840, but that's what happens when these things go unaddressed for so long. He pauses, watching her carefully. Can you afford to pay that? Yes, Madison says immediately. I can pay it today if needed. I'm sure you can, Judge Caprio says, and there's something in his voice now, a gentleness mixed with something more pointed. You probably have that much in your checking account right now, don't you? Maybe more. Money isn't really an issue for you, is it, Miss Hartwell? Madison looks uncertain, not sure where this is going. No, Your Honor. I've been very fortunate financially. Fortunate, Judge Caprio repeats thoughtfully. That's one word for it. Another word might be privileged. You grew up with advantages most people in this courtroom, most people in this city can't even imagine. Good schools, connections, opportunities, and yes, financial security. There's nothing wrong with that. You didn't choose the circumstances of your birth any more than anyone else does. But here's what I'm wondering, and I want you to really think about this before you answer. If I order you to pay $2,340, are you going to walk out of here having learned anything? Are you going to actually change, or are you just going to write a check, consider the matter closed, and go back to your life exactly as it was? The question hangs in the air, and Madison stands very still, clearly understanding that this is a pivotal moment. Her lawyer looks nervous, as if worried about where this might be going. The communications advisor has pulled out her phone, then put it away, then pulled it out again, clearly conflicted about whether she should be documenting this. I want to say I'd change, Madison says slowly, carefully, but honestly, you're right to question it. Paying a fine wouldn't really cost me anything meaningful. It would be easy, and I'm starting to realize that I've taken the easy way out of things my whole life. When things get hard, I either use my father's name to make them go away, or I throw money at the problem, or I just leave, like I did with the parking tickets. I've never actually had to face real consequences for anything. Judge Caprio nods, and there's approval in his expression. That's a very honest answer, and it tells me that maybe you've learned more in the last 30 minutes than you realize. So here's what I'm going to do, and I want you to listen carefully, because this is important. He picks up his gavel, but doesn't strike it yet. Instead, he holds it thoughtfully, turning it over in his hands, a gesture that somehow makes the moment more weighty, more significant. I'm going to fine you the full amount, $2,340. You'll pay that today before you leave this courthouse. But I'm also going to impose some additional conditions, and these are non-negotiable. If you fail to meet any of these conditions, you'll be back here facing contempt charges that could include jail time, and I assure you that being the governor's daughter won't help you then. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Madison says, and she sounds almost eager now, as if hungry for something real, something meaningful, something that might actually change her life. First, Judge Caprio says, holding up one finger, I'm ordering you to complete 200 hours of community service, but not at any of those nonprofit galas or photo opportunity events. I want you working directly with people who are struggling, homeless shelters, food banks, addiction recovery programs. Real work, not performance. And I want weekly reports from your supervisors, not from your father's office. I'll do it, Madison says immediately. Second, the judge continues, holding up another finger, I want you to attend grief counseling. Professional counseling, Miss Hartwell, with a licensed therapist who specializes in family trauma and loss. You're carrying around pain that's poisoning your life, and you need help processing it. That's not a weakness, that's wisdom. Will you do that? Madison's eyes fill with tears again, but she nods firmly. Yes, Your Honor. I will. Third, Judge Caprio says, and now his voice softens even more, and this is perhaps the most important one. I want you to write a letter to your brother. Michael. I don't know where he is or if he'll ever read it, but I want you to write down everything you've been holding inside, your anger, your grief, your love, your hopes for the future. Write it all down and keep it somewhere safe. And maybe someday, if you find him, you can give it to him. But even if you never find him, the act of writing it will help you start to heal. Will you do that? Yes, Madison whispers. I'll do all of it. I promise. Judge Caprio nods, seeming satisfied, but then something changes in his expression. He glances at the file again, then up at Inspector Quinn, who nods almost imperceptibly, as if confirming something. The judge then looks at Madison's attorney, who has been standing quietly throughout this entire exchange. Counselor, Judge Caprio says, I notice you've been very quiet during these proceedings. You haven't objected to any of my questions, haven't tried to protect your client from what could be considered intrusive inquiries into her personal life. Why is that? The lawyer, a middle-aged man with graying temples and kind eyes, steps forward slightly. Your Honor, if I may. I've known the Hartwell family for 12 years. I've watched what Michael's disappearance has done to them, and I've watched Madison struggle under the weight of being the only child left to fulfill her parents' expectations. When she called me this morning to accompany her to court, I expected to help her get the charges dismissed through legal maneuvering. But watching her here, watching her finally break through the walls she's built around herself. Honestly, Your Honor, this is the most honest I've seen her in 2 years. I wasn't going to interrupt that for anything. Judge Caprio studies the attorney for a long moment, then nods slowly. That's why you're a good lawyer, counselor. You understand that sometimes the best thing we can do for our clients isn't protecting them from consequences, but helping them face those consequences with dignity and honesty. He turns back to Madison. Your attorney cares about you, Miss Hartwell. Not just as a client, but as a person. I hope you have other people in your life who care about you that way too. I'm starting to realize I do, Madison says softly. I've just been too proud or too hurt to let them in. Well, Judge Caprio says with a small smile, maybe it's time to change that. Which brings me to one more condition, and this one is going to be the hardest. Madison braces herself, clearly expecting something severe. I want you to talk to your father, the judge says gently. Really talk to him, not about politics or appearances or managing the press, but about Michael. About your grief, about what your family has lost, about the fact that you're all suffering in silence instead of helping each other heal. I can't order that in any legal sense. I can't force you to have an honest conversation with your parent. But I'm asking you, as someone who's old enough to be your grandfather, as someone who's seen thousands of families torn apart by pride and silence and unspoken pain. I'm asking you to try. Will you try? The question seems to hit Madison harder than anything else Judge Caprio has said. She stands there, visibly struggling with it, and when she finally speaks, her voice is shaking. What if he won't listen? What if he just shuts me down like he always does when I try to bring up Michael? Then you'll know you tried, Judge Caprio says simply. You'll know that you reached out, that you made yourself vulnerable, that you chose love and truth over pride and pretense. And maybe, just maybe, your willingness to be vulnerable will give him permission to be vulnerable too. Parents don't always know how to show their pain to their children, Miss Hartwell. Sometimes they think they're protecting you by being strong, when really they're just isolating everyone in their private suffering. Madison nods slowly, and something in her expression suggests she understands this truth in a way she couldn't have an hour ago. I'll try, she says finally. I'll really try. Judge Caprio smiles that warm, grandfatherly smile that's made him beloved far beyond the borders of Providence. That's all any of us can do. Try, fail, try again, do better. That's what being human means. Judge Caprio picks up his gavel again, and the courtroom seems to collectively hold its breath. This is the moment everyone has been waiting for, the final judgment, the resolution of this case that has transformed from a simple matter of parking violations into something far more profound and human. Before I issue my final ruling, the judge says, his voice carrying that note of gentle authority that has defined his decades on the bench, I want to say something to everyone in this courtroom, because I think there's a larger lesson here that goes beyond this particular case. He looks around the room, making eye contact with the clerk, the bailiff, Inspector Quinn, the few observers who have been sitting quietly throughout the proceedings. Then his gaze returns to Madison, who stands before him with tear-stained cheeks and an expression of openness that was unimaginable when she first walked through those doors. We live in a time when people are very quick to judge each other, Judge Caprio says thoughtfully. We see someone walk into a room a certain way, wearing certain clothes, speaking with a certain tone, and we think we know everything about them. We reduce complex human beings to simple categories: entitled, privileged, careless, disrespectful. And sometimes those judgments are accurate, at least on the surface. But if we stop there, if we never look deeper, we miss the truth that every person who stands before this court, every person we encounter in our lives, is carrying stories and struggles we know nothing about. He gestures toward Madison. Miss Hartwell walked in here today acting like someone I see occasionally, someone who thinks rules don't apply to them, someone who treats our community with contempt, someone who believes their connections and money can solve any problem. And you know what? She was acting that way. That behavior was real, and it deserved to be called out. But beneath that behavior was a grieving young woman who's lost her brother, who feels abandoned by her parents, who's drowning in expectations she never asked for, and who doesn't know how to ask for help because she's been taught that vulnerability is weakness. Madison is crying again, but quietly now, and she's nodding as Judge Caprio speaks, as if he's giving voice to truths she's never been able to articulate herself. The easy thing, the judge continues, would have been to fine her, dismiss the case, and send her on her way. The easy thing would have been to treat her exactly the way she seemed to want to be treated, as a transaction, as a problem to be solved quickly so she could make her lunch appointment. But I've learned over 38 years on this bench that the easy thing is rarely the right thing. The right thing is to see people really see them, even when they're doing everything in their power to hide from being seen. Inspector Quinn is nodding slowly, and he's not the only one. Several people in the courtroom are wiping their own eyes now, moved by the judge's words and by the transformation they've witnessed. Miss Hartwell, Judge Caprio says, turning his full attention back to Madison, here is my final ruling. You are ordered to pay a fine of $2,340 for your parking violations and failure to appear. This fine will be paid in full before you leave this courthouse today. You are also ordered to complete 200 hours of community service at organizations serving Providence's most vulnerable residents, with written reports submitted to this court every 2 weeks. You will attend grief counseling with a licensed therapist for a minimum of 6 months, with proof of attendance submitted to this court monthly. And finally, you will return to this courtroom in 6 months for a progress review, at which time we will discuss how you've fulfilled these obligations and how you're moving forward with your life. He pauses, then adds, however, I'm also going to do something that might surprise you. I'm going to reduce your fine by $1,000 from $2,340 to $1,340. Do you know why? Madison looks confused, shaking her head. No, Your Honor. Why? Because, Judge Caprio says gently, I want you to take that $1,000 you're not paying to the court and donate it to that literacy program you mentioned, the one you said you actually care about, not the ones you're involved with for appearances. I want you to make that donation anonymously, not as the governor's daughter, not for the photo opportunity, but because you genuinely believe in the work they're doing. And I want you to volunteer there, personally, as part of your community service hours. Can you do that? Madison's face transforms with something that looks like joy mixed with relief mixed with gratitude. Yes, she says emphatically. Yes, I absolutely can. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so much. Judge Caprio nods, and now he raises his gavel. But before he strikes it, he says one more thing. Madison, may I call you Madison? Of course, she says. Madison, I want you to understand something. This ruling, these conditions, they're not punishment. They're an opportunity. An opportunity to become the person your brother would be proud of, the person you actually want to be beneath all the performance and pretense. You said earlier that you didn't know how to start changing your life. Well, this is how. This is your start. Not because a judge ordered it, but because you chose to show up here today, and you chose to be honest, and you chose to be vulnerable. Those were your choices, and they were brave choices, and I want you to remember that you have the power to keep making brave choices every single day. He strikes the gavel once, firmly, and the sound resonates through the courtroom like a bell. This court is adjourned. But instead of standing to leave, as he normally would, Judge Caprio does something unexpected. He stands up and walks down from the bench, something he rarely does, and approaches Madison. For a moment, she looks uncertain, not sure what's happening. Then Judge Caprio extends his hand, and she takes it, and instead of just shaking hands, he pulls her into a brief, fatherly hug. You're going to be okay, he says quietly, though his words carry in the silent courtroom. You're going to stumble sometimes, and you're going to have hard days, but you're going to be okay. And 6 months from now, when you come back here, I want to hear about all the good you've done and all the ways you've grown. Can you promise me that? I promise, Madison says, and she's hugging him back, this stern judge who saw through her armor to the hurting person beneath. When they separate, Madison turns to address the courtroom one more time. Thank you, she says, her voice clear and strong. Thank you, Your Honor, for not letting me get away with being less than I could be. Thank you, Inspector Quinn, for your patience. Thank you to everyone who witnessed this and didn't judge me for how I walked in here. I'm going to do better. I'm going to be better. She gathers her things, speaks briefly with her attorney, and then walks toward the exit. But at the door, she pauses and turns back one more time. Her eyes find Judge Caprio, who has returned to the bench and is already reviewing the next case file. Your Honor. She calls out. He looks up. Yes, Miss Hartwell? If I find my brother, when I find my brother, can I bring him here to meet you? I think he'd like you. I think you'd like him too. Judge Caprio's face breaks into a wide smile, and his eyes are bright with emotion. I would be honored to meet your brother, Madison. You bring him by any time. She nods, smiles through tears one last time, and walks out of the courtroom. The doors close behind her, and there's a moment of profound silence. Then Inspector Quinn walks over to the bench and says quietly, "Judge, in 15 years working with you, I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like that." Judge Caprio looks up at him with a tired but satisfied expression. "You know what I saw when I looked at that young woman, Quinn? I saw every kid who's ever felt invisible in their own family, every person who's ever hidden behind anger because they didn't know how to show their pain, every soul who's ever wondered if anyone really sees them. She walked in here acting like someone I couldn't help, but underneath, she was crying out for exactly what everyone who comes through these doors is crying out for: to be seen, to be heard, to be given a chance to be better." Quinn nods slowly. "Do you think she'll actually do it? The community service, the counseling, all of it?" "I do," Judge Caprio says with conviction. "Because for the first time maybe in her entire life, someone gave her consequences that weren't about punishment or politics or appearances. Someone gave her consequences that were about growth and healing and becoming fully human. That's what we should all be doing for each other, isn't it? Helping each other become fully human." The clerk calls the next case, and life in Providence Municipal Court continues. But everyone who was in that courtroom today will remember what they witnessed: not just a judge issuing a ruling, but a human being helping another human being find their way home to themselves. 3 weeks later, Judge Caprio receives a letter. It's on expensive stationery, but the handwriting is unpracticed and genuine, filled with crossed-out words and obvious emotion. It's from Madison, and she tells him about her first week volunteering at a homeless shelter, about her first session with a therapist, about the letter she wrote to Michael that she keeps in her nightstand drawer. She tells him about the conversation she finally had with her father, how hard it was, how much they both cried, how they're trying to find their way back to each other. She tells him she donated the $1,000 to the literacy program and has started volunteering there twice a week, working with kids who remind her of herself and Michael when they were young. At the bottom of the letter, she writes, "You told me I was going to be okay. I'm starting to believe you. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Thank you for showing me that justice isn't just about punishment, it's about redemption. Thank you for being exactly who you are. This city is lucky to have you. The world is lucky to have you." Judge Caprio reads the letter 3 times, then carefully folds it and places it in his desk drawer alongside hundreds of other letters from people whose lives were changed in his courtroom. Then he smiles, puts on his reading glasses, and picks up the next case file. Because this is what he does. This is what he's always done. Not just dispense justice, but dispense mercy. Not just judge cases, but see people. Not just enforce the law, but remind everyone who walks through his courtroom that beneath our mistakes and our masks, we're all just human beings trying our best to find our way home. And in a world that often feels harsh and unforgiving, that might be the most important kind of justice there is.